Hello, Body and Messiah. Today we're going to cover TBON Lesson 10, Part 4 of the Spiritual Gifts from God. Today we're going to cover two of the spiritual gifts. Their dreams and interpretation of dreams. So I'm going to say a disclaimer before we begin because this lesson and the remaining spiritual gifts that we're going to cover, a lot of people really desire to have. And the disclaimer I'm going to say is to be aware and be cautious of those who are continuously having dreams and visions and prophetic things for the nation of the world or popular people that are having these every other day, okay, or every other week. That is treading the line of fortune telling, and that's something that's associated with witchcraft and satanic practices. And by Messiah, we don't want to get in the arena of entertaining the demonic spirits. Fortune telling comes from something demonic. And when people are into the gain of financial gain or popularity's sake, even to have all these dreams and visions and prophecies every other week, about popular people or about nations and stuff, and they're rambling on, you can tell and discern whether or not it's from the Ruach of Elohim or not. And so we have to be cautious. And furthermore, if a person is dreaming all the time, then they're sleeping all the time. Okay? And we have to be awoke, not just physically, but spiritually. We have to take back our narrative when it comes to these spiritual gifts so this next generation and current will not go down the line of being deceived. When we cross this line with fortune telling, soothsaying, mediums, and all this stuff, or familiar spirits, we're going to cover how that treads the line, and it's the opposite of discerning of the spirit. And what I'm saying to you in this disclaimer, when a person is doing it every other day and every other week, and people are cleaving to them because they need to see what's going on, what's happening, then they're failing on their part as individuals to seek out what God would have them to do. And we as individuals have to go before the Most High God and seek Him and seek His Ruach in order for Him to guide us. No other person, no so-called gift, which are some gifts that are of the demonic, or we'll get trapped in entertaining these demonic spirits that are going to do nothing but mock us and mistreat us. Okay, that's the disclaimer. So be cautious of that and kind of get away from that. You have to focus on the Most High God. We don't only have to be physically awoke, we need to be spiritually awoke in this present day and time so we don't get deceived. Now, what we're going to see, I'm going to cover a few dreams. One of the dreams is Joseph, some dreams that he has had. And then we're going to cover under the kingdom of Pharaoh, the cupbearer, the baker, and then the Pharaoh's dream, and a dream by King Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king. And we're going to cover on this side the interpretations of the dream. And as you're going to see in here, I'm going to mention that I've noticed that through family lines, I've seen people have different gifts of prophecy that has passed down from generation to generation. And this is also true with dreams. But I also want to mention that a lot of people figure that if you're getting a gift from the Ruach of Elohim, or God has granted you one of his spiritual gifts, that you have to be a descendant of Israel or patriarch Abraham, or you have to be so righteous and walking on the straight and narrow. As we're going to see with some of these dreams, for instance, with the Pharaoh and Nebuchadnezzar, they were idol worshippers, but still God gave them a dream as a warning for them because he rules kingdom, he's sovereign, and he's lined them up and put them into play in action so that there'll be a warning for those who are over the kingdom at that time. Now, if they don't heed that warning, that's on them. And what we're going to also see is we'll know the source of interpreting dreams, where it comes from. So let's begin. What we're going to notice here, if we go to Genesis chapter 37, verses 5 through 11, This is where Joseph, who is one of the sons of Jacob of Israel, has a dream. And we're going to look at specifically verse 7 and 9. In verse 7, Joseph is telling his brothers and his father about his dream. In verse 7, he says, there we were binding sheaves. I'm assuming like sheaves of wheat or something. Sheaves in the middle of the field. All of a sudden, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf. Okay, this didn't go over well with the brothers because they were like, so you're trying to say we're supposed to be bowing down to you? Who are you supposed to be? So they were a little offended by it, but he told them the dream. On another night, he had another dream, and that's in verse 9. And he says, but then, okay, in the description, verse 9 is showing where he had another dream. And he says, suddenly there was the sun and the moon and the 11 stars bowing down to me. So in that moment, the brothers, once again, they were irritated by him saying like, oh, so you're saying basically we're going to be bowing down to you. What, are you going to be a king or something? Then even patriarch Jacob, Israel, was offended because he was like, so you're saying me and your mom, your mother is going to be bowing down to you? Like, whatever. But Jacob kept that dream in his mind. He knew that the Most High God may be giving Joseph a dream for a purpose and a reason. So I want to underline the fact here that I have underlined in red is when it says the sun and the moon and the 11 stars bowing down to me. Jacob, patriarch Jacob, Israel said, so you're saying me and your mother are going to be bowing down? Because my assumption is he's the sun and she's the moon. But also pointing out to the accuracy of dreams. The 11 stars bowing down to me. You see, there were 13 children of Jacob of Israel. Dinah, D-I-N-A, is not usually counted because she's a sister. Usually it's just the 12 brothers that are counted as far as those who are descendants of Jacob because they will carry on the name and the heritage. So the accuracy of this dream that I'm pointing out is that even though Israel and Jacob knew the sun and the moon was Jacob and his wife, the accuracy of the dream of the 11 bowing down, there were not 11 brothers, sons at that time, the siblings for Joseph. His brother Benjamin had not been born yet. So remember, Benjamin is born and his mother passes away. She dies giving birth to Benjamin. So it shows the accuracy of this dream that is saying 11 stars bowing down. But they weren't fully aware of that yet. So we go on and see later on down in scriptures that this dream was fulfilled in Genesis chapter 42, verse 7. And this is where Joseph is now second in the kingdom of Pharaoh, and his brothers have come because there's a drought, and they come and bow down before him. And it says in verse 7, then Joseph's brothers came and bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. And verse 9 it says, then he remembered the dream he had. So I'm just pointing out the fact that sometimes God may give you a vision or a dream, warning you about something or foretelling of something in the future, but it may come to be fulfilled decades later. And as I've shared with you, some of you may have seen where I shared a video regarding my mother's passing. I had a dream over 2 decades ago, and actually I thought this dream about the car accident was dealing with me. So I didn't know the fulfillment of the details until after it happened. And so after she passed, I realized that dream/vision was about her. So that's just to let you know, sometimes you may have dreams and they may come to pass immediately. They may come to pass decades later. So at this time, Joseph he's much older. His brothers didn't recognize him. And so he's second ruler in the kingdom of Pharaoh. Then he realizes that's what my dream was about. Now let's go on here from when Joseph, before his brothers have thrown him into the pit, and because they were angry with him and jealous of him, so he was thrown into a pit, and some Midianite travelers came and pulled him out, and his brothers let him be sold to the Midianites. The Midianites sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites, and the Ishmaelites brought him into the Egyptian kingdom as a slave. So we have here this going on in this scenario. Years are passing, and what happened is Joseph worked under the head of the bodyguards named Potiphar. And the story goes that Potiphar's wife tried to make sexual advances to Joseph. Joseph would not cross that line, so she falsely accused him of raping her, and so he was thrown into prison. While he was in prison, there he encountered the cupbearer and the baker of the Pharaoh. And this is in Genesis chapter 40. So Joseph's noticing that, excuse me if I slip up and say Jacob, but Joseph is noticing that the cupbearer and the baker have their countenance have fallen, they're sad. And so he asks why. And they mention that they've had a dream, but no one knows the interpretation. So Joseph says to them, tell me the dream. But I want to mention, because he knows the source of the interpretation, all these gifts come from the Most High God, from the Ruach of Elohim. So in Genesis chapter 40, verse 8, he says, don't interpretations belong to God, Adonai Elohim. So he knows the source. So he tells the cupbearer and the baker to tell him. And so in the dream for the cupbearer says he sees a vine. And so this vine begins to blossom and sprout and grow 3 different blossoms that produce grapes. The cupbearer takes the grapes and he crushes them down and put them in the cup for the Pharaoh, and he hands them to the Pharaoh. Then we have the baker. The baker says in his dream, there are 3 baskets on his head, and the top basket is food for the Pharaoh. And birds are coming along, and they're pecking and devouring the food in the top basket. So, and like I said, with all of these gifts, you have to have faith and proceed before the Most High God in prayer in order to gain understanding for your gift, or even for interpreting what is occurring. So Joseph went before the Most High God and he told them, and he might not have did it overnight, it might have been immediately. God began to reveal to him what these dreams were about. And so he told the cupbearer, in 3 days you will go before the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh will lift your head up and place you back in your position as his cupbearer. So he told the cupbearer, do not forget me. When you go before the Pharaoh, remember me. Okay? Remember me, and that you were given this interpretation from the Most High God. So for the baker, it was bad news. So the baker, he said, you will go before the Pharaoh in 3 days, but your head will be lifted up off your head, and the birds will feed upon basically your severed head. So in 3 days, when you go before the Pharaoh, you're going to die. He's going to issue a decree for you to die. Sad news. But I just want to point out the fact that in knowing and understanding the source of the interpretation of the dreams, he gave an accurate interpretation. So when the cupbearer went before the Pharaoh, he knew this is exactly as Joseph said, right? The danger of, like I said, entertaining the demonic, those that are on the flip side, that are engaged in witchcraft, fortune telling, and all that stuff, and mediums and familiar spirit, is the demonic will say something, oh, give good news for both of them, and it's not true. Or do something like say, oh, in 3 years, you're going to be in prison for 3 years. They won't give you an accurate interpretation because they're driven by the demonic. to cause man to falter and to fail, and cause man to come short of God's glory and the purpose that they have. So you always have to trust men of God, women of God, just the Most High God as far as understanding and interpreting different things and gifts, okay? Now, 2 years passed. The cupbearer, I guess he was so excited to be alive and not dead that he forgot about Joseph. But 2 years later, we have the Pharaoh. He has two dreams that trouble him severely. In his first dream, there were 7 healthy cows. Okay. Then he saw also 7 ugly, emaciated, skinny, bony cows. The 7 ugly, skinny cows devoured and ate up the healthy cows. Then in the second dream, there were 7 ears of plump, good, delicious corn, and also 7 ears of thin, scorched, burnt up, weak corn. The scorched, burnt up corn devoured the 7 ears of plump, good corn. So it troubled the Pharaoh. He wanted to understand, what did it mean? Because these skinny and emaciated cows and corn just looked horrible, and it troubled him. So he called forth all his magicians and fortune tellers, so-called wise men, and none of them could give him the interpretation. And you may be saying, well, they could have just made up a story. Not so, because if they made up the story and it didn't come to pass, then Pharaoh was going to put them to death. So they didn't know what the answer was. So the cupbearer remembered Joseph, and he was like, forgive me, Pharaoh, because I've sinned against this young man named Joseph. Of all the people who would know what the interpretation of your dreams is, it would be him. So please call him forth, and he will give you the interpretation. So the Pharaoh called Joseph forth, and I want to once again note, as we see Pharaoh having this dream in Genesis 41, in Genesis 41, we see in verse 6 and verse 25, Joseph answers the Pharaoh, and he makes basically it clear. It is not within me, basically, to give you an interpretation of your dream. But God will answer with shalom for Pharaoh. So God is going to answer you in peace. He even says here in verse 25 of Genesis 41, God has told Pharaoh what he, meaning God, Adonai Elohim, is about to do. So he's making a profession and making it clear to Pharaoh, I'm not the one interpreting. I'm not the one who has this power. I go before the Most High God, and he's letting you know what he's about to do to you and your kingdom. And the interpretation of the dream that God put forth through Joseph to Pharaoh is there will be 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. So Pharaoh was like, okay, what am I going to do? So he escalated Joseph up to the second in the kingdom, because Joseph was able to give the interpretation via the Ruach of Elohim. And he put Joseph in charge of, for the 7 years of plenty, storing back food, because there was going to be 7 years of drought and no food. And one thing that happens when we see the fulfillment of Genesis 42 verse 7, where Joseph is seeing his brother and realize that, okay, this is the fulfillment of the dream, Joseph also comes to the full understanding. When you look and read Genesis chapter 45, Joseph is telling his brothers, when he finally reveals himself clearly to them, because they didn't notice him. He had on all the royal garments or whatever of the Egyptians, and probably eye makeup and stuff like that they didn't realize who he was. So when he revealed himself to his brothers kind of got in a panic, like, oh my goodness, we sold him into slavery. He's probably going to kill us. He told them, don't fear. Do not be scared. I love you guys. Basically, I'm your brother Joseph. And you didn't do this to me, but God did this to me. God did this to me because what Satan was trying to use for bad, God meant for all of our good. If God had not sent me ahead of time before you to be in captivity and come out on this other end, then I would not have been able to help my family during this drought time. Not only just the descendants of Israel, to help Jacob and all the descendants, also to help millions of people throughout Africa, you know. So he made it very clear in Genesis verse 45 that he come to the realization that God had a purpose in all that torment he went through in being in captivity. All right, note to self, descendants of Israel. Anyway, we're going to move on to Nebuchadnezzar. I just wanted to point out, though, that in Joseph coming full circle, he was able to given the interpretation of the dreams for the cupbearer and the baker and the pharaoh kind of immediately, but for himself, it was decades later for him to get a clear understanding of his initial dream. And note also, these dreams were not happening every single day, every other day, every other week. And Joseph was not going around for the sake of popularity, running around Pharaoh and his other leading generals and stuff and going, I can do this, I can do that. And I'm going to tell you this dream means this and this means that. No, only when moved by the Ruach of Elohim and also if asked, he gave the interpretation. Okay? So I want y'all to understand that this is not a daily occurrence and thing for Joseph. Now we're going to move on to Daniel chapter 4. In Daniel chapter 4, we have the king of Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar, and we have the prophet Daniel. So Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and in this dream, he is so disturbed. There is this huge, gigantic tree, and it's as if this tree covers most of the earth, and all these animals and birds are feeding from the tree and the fruit of the tree, and it's just glorious, beautiful. But then all of a sudden he hears a watcher, which is like part of the heavenly host, yells, chop it down. And so the tree is chopped down. And when the tree chopped down, the watcher is saying, strip it of all of its branches, strip the leaves off of it, and cast all the fruits off, and let all the beasts and the animals scatter away from it. And also, the watcher is stating in his dream or vision, let him be watered by the dew from heaven. Let him have his portion with the animals in the field and eat of the grass. Basically, let him have the mind of an animal and roam with the animals. So King Nebuchadnezzar is horrified at this dream. As you read in Daniel chapter 4, he says, I'm troubled by the images and visions that I see. So it felt so real to him. A lot of times when you see people who have dreams, they'll feel like they're also having a vision because it feels so real and ominous. And so he calls forth King Nebuchadnezzar, his, once again, wise men, soothsayers, fortune tellers, magicians, and all that stuff. Nobody can give him an interpretation. But he knew deep down inside that there was one person who would probably know the interpretation. Now, King Nebuchadnezzar was an idol worshiper. So even though he knew that Daniel was filled with the spirit of the Ruach of Elohim, because Nebuchadnezzar is an idol worshiper, he words it real weird because he still doesn't have a full, clear acceptance of the Most High God. Okay? As we can see in Daniel chapter 3 is when we see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, where they would not bow down to that statue, that idol, when the music was played. And they were, King Nebuchadnezzar was encouraged to put them in the fire to be burned, right? But they didn't get burned up. King Nebuchadnezzar and everybody witnessed that they were brought out the fire, not singed, not a hair on their head burnt, because God shielded them. And he pronounced that God is the greatest, their God is the greatest of all gods. So even in the mind of a person that's an idol worshiper or a leader, he was trying to give honor and respect to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel. So Nebuchadnezzar knew Daniel had righteousness from the Ruach of Elohim, and I'm going to show you in scripture where he's trying to state that. But as an idol worshiper, he's still a little crooked. And a part of this dream, I feel, is God trying to wake Nebuchadnezzar up to fully acknowledge the Most High God for who he is. So anyway, this is what King Nebuchadnezzar says. He goes to Daniel, which he named I think it's Belteshazzar. So it's Belte, and then Shazar. So he calls him and names Daniel Belteshazzar. And this is basically, he names Daniel in honor of one of his idol, Baal. And it's like Baal protect him or something. So like I said, Nebuchadnezzar is an idol worship. He fully hasn't come into the understanding of the Most High God, but he's about to. So he goes to Daniel and he says in Daniel chapter 4, verse 15, "Now you, Belteshazzar," basically Daniel, "tell me its meaning, for none of the wise men of my kingdom are able to." He goes on to say, "But you are able, for the spirits of the holy gods is in you." So he knew there was holiness in Daniel. He knew who the Most High God of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was. So in the last ditch effort, he was like, just tell me. I won't punish you. I won't do anything. Just tell me what this dream is about. Okay? So Daniel goes through faith and prayer. Okay? And he proceeds. When God gives him an understanding and he tells the king. Now I'm summarizing. I'm not going through every single verse. He basically tells him the trees is King Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, the Babylonian kingdom. And if he does not acknowledge that God alone is sovereign over mankind, and he gives kingdoms to whom he wishes, you, King Nebuchadnezzar, will be struck with madness. You will be driven away from people and dwell with the wild animals. You will be on the field eating grass, feeding on it like an ox, and you will be drenched with the dew of heaven. So Nebuchadnezzar, I know he was like shocked, but he knows that Daniel is going to tell him the truth based on what God has shown him. And you'll even see that not all is lost. God is still trying to give Nebuchadnezzar an opportunity. And so Daniel advises him. In verse 24, we see here. So Daniel is telling King Nebuchadnezzar, maybe you be able to hold on to your prosperity, but here's what you have to do. Renounce your sins through righteousness and your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor. Perhaps your prosperity will be prolonged. So he's given him an opportunity. Renounce your sin. His sin is thinking that he came into power and is ruling over this kingdom by his own strength. And that was not true. God was going to decree to him that his kingdom is going to be torn down if he did not acknowledge that God is sovereign and sovereign alone. If he did not understand that and clearly state that, then God was going to have this particular dream/prophetic dream come true. So it lasted for a whole 12 months. I guess Nebuchadnezzar was on his guard and keeping his pride reined in. But then all of a sudden, he's walking on the rooftop of one of his palaces, and he was like, what kingdom is greater than mine? Like I, Nebuchadnezzar, with my own strength and power, has built up this kingdom. None is greater. And before he could finish boasting and being prideful, he hears the announcement from heaven. King Nebuchadnezzar, it's decreed to you that your kingdom shall be taken away from you. You will be given your portion amongst the beasts of the field for 7 seasons. My assumption, that's 7 years, until you acknowledge that the Most High God is sovereign alone. He is the one who will grant kingdoms to mankind, but he's sovereign alone. So he was struck with the madness, with the mind of an animal, and immediately was out there in the fields eating grass. For 7 years, this went on. And then finally, he came into a moment of clarity and he acknowledged that the Most High God is God alone. Without man, remember, he alone is the one who grants kingdoms to who he wishes and builds them up and tear them down. So, by the Messiah, this is clear understanding that God is God alone. And even though he held off for 12 months, if he held off longer, this is a dream, a prophetic dream that was warning him. Like you could possibly change the outcome if you humble yourself before the Most High God. But he did not. So this is a telltale message. Look, body of Messiah, for most of you who are out there who have this gift when it comes to dreams and God forewarning of things, there's a purpose in it. And I want you to know, under this taking back our narrative, that we go away from the things that are done for sensationalism and popularity's sake. Like we see some people out here who are trying to every day, give prophetic dreams or what have you. You have a purpose under the Ruach of Elohim. Sometimes it's to forewarn of tragedy that's going to come upon a whole group of people. As we saw, the Egyptian kingdom was about to suffer severely if it was not for God elevating Joseph. It could be for individual people, like we saw with the cupbearer and the baker. It could be for you to warn someone. So if you're having a dream and God is giving you this gift, it's for you to go before him with faith and prayer so that you will know the next step. I'm going to give a couple examples from my life experience. There have been a couple of times when my mom, when she was living, that me and her have had a dream the same day or night about the same person. One time when I was in high school, me and her had a dream about the neighbor across the street, and it was dealing with like snakes attacking. So when I told her about it, and she told me, and this happened and this, and I'm like, yes. It's just so shocking and weird. But it was for a purpose. So I went to the neighbor across the street, and when I talked to her and saw her and said, look, I had this weird dream, and my mom did too. And these snakes meant the enemy is going to try to attack you, going to try and come at you to have you falter. And so I understood that in my spirit that's what that meant. So be on your guard. Be cautious. Another time, me and my mom had the exact same dream, and it was dealing with my husband and something dealing with snakes. Almost the exact same dream. And so I prayed about it, and God gave me the understanding of what it was. And I went to him and talked with him. So there are purposes behind this, not for vanity's sake, not for popularities or self-glorification. It's for the purpose of warning people. Don't be scared about it. Don't feel weird about it. Just go to the Most High God with faith and prayer. There's another time that I had a dream. Now, in all, I want to say that I've had maybe about 12 in my entire life that felt like I knew this was foretelling of something. Okay? It wasn't a dream where I ate some food and it was because I ate a lot of food and my stomach was upset, or there were strange noises in the background that caused me to dream crazy. When you know this gift, God will reveal it to you, and usually it's to warn. So another time I wanted to mention, I had a dream/vision. A family member of mine's life was in danger, and I can feel the panic in this family member. Like, oh my goodness, they're about to die. So I was pregnant with one of my children, and I remember getting up crying in tears because someone had placed this person's life in danger, and it was like they knew they were going to have to fight for their life or possibly die. And I went before the Most High God, and I said, dear Abba, dear Heavenly Father, I don't know what this is about, but I know you're the ruler of all and everything. So Adonai Elohim, please, Abba, shower us with your grace and mercy and change the tide of the outcome of this situation. rout out the enemy and destroy him and remove him from this situation so that this person's life will be spared, and warn them, Adonai Elohim. So I placed that before the Most High God at his altar. And about 2 years later, when I'm talking with this family member, I come to realize they were telling me about what happened 2 years prior. And the scenario was something happened and they knew their lives was in danger. But the way God did it, he interceded at that moment and allowed it to change to where nobody's life was taken. Body of Messiah, this is just giving proof that if God has given you a gift, it's the purpose for the glory of his kingdom. Look, this relative, when I shared with this relative what happened, this relative was amazed. But I was like, the Most High God did that because someone needed to intercede with faith and prayer on their behalf. They had no idea they were in danger, but God does this for a purpose, for the glory of his kingdom and his alone. So, Body of Messiah, let's take back our narrative. Let's teach the current generation that it might have gotten lost in all of this sensationalism, and return back to the whole truth of Adonai's word. So we can also teach our next generation. Like I've said, there's people who are scattered out in all types of denominations who are not aware of this group, or they're weirded out by this gift. But you should not be. God grants gifts for a purpose, and therefore his purpose alone and for the glory of his kingdom. Well, Body Messiah, this is the end of part 4 of lesson 10. We'll probably cover, I'm not sure which one we'll cover next, but I hope you're able to join me. And like I always say to you, may Adonai Elohim cover and surround you and your family, shield and protect you, and envelop you in his shalom peace. Goodbye.